10. You might have 10 reasons why you're not effects topical. You need to use the context of the round. Pick your 6 best, pick your 4 best if you really want to get time back on FXT, or read all 10 if you think it's their best argument, the only thing they can go for, and you want to shut the door there and make them go for bad arguments. Then read all 10. Like, you need to have the flexibility to make those kind of choices. And so one way is to keep time and to get the time back is that if you're just prepared. Because then you're not thinking of those arguments on your feet while you're up there. So that's less chances for you to trip over your words and for you to get confused or for you to be not concise or get stuck on an argument for like an extra 30 seconds because you can't disengage from it because you don't really know what you're saying or didn't really have a strategy going in. Those are the kind of arguments people get stuck on, is when that happens. So you definitely need to prepare and have, if you hear, and one thing I keep yelling at my debaters for, and I'm not going to cut these blocks for them, if you hear an argument against your AF, you should have a page of paper on it the next time you hear it. There's no reason why you shouldn't. I mean, I guess if it's the same tournament. But even then, you should have that flow. You should at least have the arguments you made the other round, right? And so you should have that. And if you have that page, you will be fast and efficient when you're answering that argument. And that will help you get time back. Another thing you can do too is, and this doesn't necessarily help as much get you the time back, but it does help you have a plan and appear as though you have a plan, is change the order of the speech. Like if there are things that you know you can answer quickly, even if it's the taboo thing, even if you don't put T on top, you can't be afraid to do it. Like if you think that there's a dis ad that you can answer in less than a minute because they're just dumb and the argument doesn't apply, you just do it first and get it out of the way, right? If you leave it for the bottom because you think it has no time, that's where I think people get in more danger because they leave it for the bottom like, oh, I can answer this in 5 seconds even if I have to. Like, that's really risky because A, you might not have that 5 seconds, and B, what if you're wrong? Like, what if you misunderstood the dis ad a little bit, and all of a sudden you get down there with 5 seconds and your argument doesn't fly, or they have extensions that answer your argument and they're baiting you into it, right? Like, there are lots of things that could happen. You just want to get that out of the way, make sure you put enough time to it, but get time back. Like, I think, and this is I think this is good advice, the easiest place to get time back when you're the affirmative is on dis ads, personally. They're the ones that involve the most cards from the negative, but like, so their time spent to arguments made ratio is the largest on dis ads. They may spend 2.5 minutes reading a dis ad, but only make 4 arguments, right? Whereas on Topicality, they're making 10 arguments in 45 seconds. So you need to make sure you capitalize on getting time back on dis ads, I think, personally. Especially because most dis ads, especially in LD, because a large amount of the judging pool doesn't like dis ads or thinks that they're too unlikely or your impacts are too big or whatever. It's an easy way to make a lot of time back even without reading cards. You can just make 10 analytics on a dis ad, like no threshold, like these impacts are not likely. When's the last time you saw a nuclear war? Like, they don't have a card that says that my plan specifically is going to piss off China, just that any kind of plan is going to piss off China. Like, that's not good enough. My solvency is much more specific than that. Like, you can make these kind of analytical arguments against dis ads much faster, and they're effective arguments, than you can against, say, T, where you have to read a counterinterpretation, have to read standards that support your counterinterpretation, have to play defense on their voters. Like, a full strategy against a topicality violation takes some time. Like, it just does. So make sure you recognize the places, and that arguments made to time spent ratio, I think, is another thing to kind of pay attention to. You don't want to, like, that's not something you watch the clock for or anything. You just kind of need to keep that in your mind. Like, when you hear someone read a really long card, that's time that you need to be using effectively. Either going back on your flow to answer something before you haven't answered yet, because that's going to save you time and prep time. Or just make a note to yourself, like, they spent a minute there, like, this does not need a minute or whatever. And just kind of mentally note to yourself. And you should pay attention to when they get stuck in an argument and can't disengage from it, and are just kind of trapped in some kind of argument purgatory. And you need to make sure that you recognize those times too, because it might look like they spent 1.5 minutes on T, but really they didn't. They babbled about their voters because they made a T-shell off the top of their head and like made 4 voters they didn't need to make or whatever, and were just babbling. Like, they didn't actually spend 1.5 minutes there. You need to make a note of that and like mentally like recognize that that's not time you have to make up actually, because none of that was effective arguments by them. And so changing the order too then is what this all started. I don't really know where I am now. but changing the order is a good way.
I didn't blow it, so don't worry.
Good, sweet. Changing the order is a good way also just to be in control of the debate. Get stuff, do some house cleaning that you know you can answer fast, get that time back right away. And then, so like for instance, if you get your 2 minutes back right away on the dis ad, like you get 2 whole minutes back, now you have time to overcover T when you take it next. People overcover T all the damn time. Because if you don't, and they go for it, suicide style or something, like that's when you're gonna lose some debates every once in a while. And so, sometimes like, we get it, I know one strategy, and I'll talk about it later on the neg, is to read really short T-shells. Because then you just get giddy when you're listening to the 1AR, being like, oh, minute and a half's gone by on my 40-second T-shell, they're still answering. Oh, that's 2 minutes. And you just start watching the clock, and you can notice where they're really screwing themselves and just leaking away time in the debate when they just overcover things. And so you want to give yourself the opportunity and the ability to make that mistake. The only way you can do that is by getting the stuff done that you can answer efficiently first. And now, if you overcover T a little bit, it's not that bad for you because you've already created the 2-minute cushion you needed in that debate to overcover T. Whereas, if you overcover T as the first thing that you do, now all of a sudden, you don't have a cushion anymore. Now you're scrambling just to get to everything else in the debate. You're not in control of your speech anymore. And so, don't be afraid to do that. Probably 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to answer T first. But there's going to be times where we have a clean kill on something and it's really easy. You have a card that just says their argument isn't true and your card's way better than theirs, or their argument wasn't carded but had good impacts and you're worried about it a little bit. Get those things out of the way really fast if you have those opportunities. If you don't, yeah, be safe. Answer those like procedural voters first, like you've been taught. But don't be afraid sometimes to change it up. Another thing you can do, it's kind of like an insurance policy you can take out in the debate if you're the affirmative, is you can have theory offense. You can make theory arguments that win the debate for you if the negative mishandles it. And not only that, is it makes the negative have harder decisions to kick positions and to choose what to go for. Now all of a sudden, if they don't want to answer this counterplan that you're saying is conditional or dispositional, they have to not only kick the counterplan, but also answer your theory offense. That's why conditionality is okay, or why they should be allowed to kick it. And now all of a sudden, they're not taking advantage of their 6-3 split, because they're spending some of that time in their 6-minute speech getting out of offensive arguments that you ran, rather than making offensive arguments of their own, which is what they need to do to win. All you have to do as the affirmative is answer their arguments. They have to make the arguments that win the debate. And so if they're all of a sudden spending time in their rebuttal answering arguments that you've made to win the debate, now the negative is scrambling a little bit. And so you can put them on their back foot. That's playing offense on the affirmative, saying things like conditionality is bad, or T is not a voter, or like stuff like that. Maybe not T is not a voter, but T is a reverse voter or something. Arguments like that give you a foothold in the debate to force them to spend time there before they can kick the position. Those kind of arguments, I think, are really good for strategy. Overusing them can kind of get you a bad reputation sometimes, but especially on the T flow. But if you make those arguments on counterplan flows, they're extremely effective. That's probably the most effective place to put theory offense, is when anytime anyone runs a counterplan. If the topic counterplan you think is topical, even if it's like borderline topical or affects topical or something, make that argument. Make the argument that it's topical, because even if you're not right, or even if it's like borderline right, they still have to answer it, right? Like if you can make a voter like, they broke the rules, this counterplan is topical, if I had done this as my AF, there's nothing about the resolution that says you can't consult or ask someone else first. There's nothing about the resolution that says that I can't ask China first before I engage Cuba. And so if you make those kind of arguments and say, now they've broken a social contract of LD by running a topical counterplan, they should be dropped for that because they broke the rules. The rules are the most important thing in debate, and they broke them. You can make those kind of arguments. Now they have to answer those to get out of the counterplan. So I think that's really important. And so those are some of the things you can do as the AF, and some of the things to be thinking about, because you have to make that time up. If you don't make the time up in those 2 speeches, you will lose. Because you pretty much don't have a choice. Like, you have to make it back. And that's the whole point.